Spirit Airlines shut down earlier this month. Its fleet of dozens of leased planes were left stranded all over the country. Now many of the canary yellow jets need a place to go. That's where pilot Steve Giordano comes in.
At one time, Spirit Airlines was one of the busiest low-cost carriers in America, with bright yellow planes filling airports across the country. But today, dozens of those aircraft sit parked and unused, creating a strange sight that has left many people asking questions. What happened to Spirit's fleet, and why are so many planes no longer flying? The answers involve financial struggles, industry challenges, and decisions that shocked both passengers and aviation experts. Join us in this video as we uncover what really happened to Spirit's 120 abandoned airplanes and where they may end up next. The hidden gold mine inside Spirit's collapse. Most people think an airline bankruptcy means the story is over. Planes stop flying, employees leave, and the company simply disappears. But what is happening to Spirit Airlines is far more complicated and far more surprising. This isn't the kind of bankruptcy where a company restructures, cuts costs, and tries to make a comeback. Spirit has entered liquidation. That means a bankruptcy court is now responsible for turning everything the airline owns into cash. Every aircraft, every engine, every spare part, and even valuable airport gates are being examined and prepared for sale so creditors can recover as much money as possible. And the numbers involved are staggering. Court filings valued Spirit's aircraft and engines at roughly $1.3 billion. On top of that, the airline held around $167 million in spare parts inventory and another $86.7 million in airport slots, including highly sought-after positions at airports like LaGuardia. In other words, Spirit may be gone, but what it leaves behind is a giant treasure chest worth billions. That treasure chest has triggered a feeding frenzy. Creditors want repayment. Competitors want aircraft. Leasing companies want their property back. Everyone is racing to claim a piece of what's left. But here is the twist that shocks most people. Spirit didn't actually own most of its airplanes. Around 76% of the fleet, roughly 124 aircraft, was leased from giant aviation finance companies. Most travelers have never heard of these firms, yet they quietly own thousands of airplanes around the world. Companies such as AerCap, SMBC Aviation Capital, and Jackson Square Aviation don't operate airlines themselves. Instead, they buy aircraft and rent them to carriers, much like a landlord rents apartments to tenants. And when Spirit collapsed, a little-known rule in U.S. bankruptcy law suddenly became incredibly important. The rule is called Section 1110. Under Section 1110, aircraft leasing companies don't have to wait years in court like most creditors. Once an airline files for bankruptcy, a countdown begins. If payments are not maintained, the lessors can legally reclaim their aircraft after a short period. No endless legal battles, no standing at the back of the line. They can simply take back what belongs to them. The law exists for a simple reason. Airplanes are unique assets. They are extremely valuable, highly mobile, and can be flown across international borders in just a few hours. Lawmakers wanted to ensure that owners could quickly recover them if an airline failed. So the moment Spirit entered liquidation, teams of inspectors, engineers, and ferry pilots spread across the country. Their mission was straightforward: locate the aircraft, inspect them, and prepare them to be returned to their owners. What makes this timing remarkable is that the aviation industry desperately needs airplanes right now. The world is facing one of the worst aircraft shortages in modern history. Industry forecasts suggest airlines could short nearly 4,800 aircraft by the end of 2027. Airbus has struggled to meet production targets, while Boeing continues working through its own challenges. Supply chain problems have slowed deliveries across the entire industry. That means 124 Airbus narrow-body jets suddenly becoming available is a huge opportunity. Almost immediately, airlines began paying attention. Frontier, Spirit's closest low-cost rival, is considered a natural fit because it already operates a similar Airbus fleet. JetBlue, American, United, and numerous international carriers have also been linked to discussions surrounding available aircraft. But before these jets begin their next chapter, they must undergo a transformation. The famous bright yellow Spirit paint schemes will gradually disappear. Aircraft will be stripped, sanded, and repainted in the colors of their new operators. It sounds simple, but repainting an airliner is surprisingly expensive. Depending on the aircraft and design, the process can cost anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 and may keep the plane out of service for up to 2 weeks. Because of those costs, some aircraft spend months flying in awkward transitional designs. Passengers occasionally see planes wearing the old airline's colors with only a temporary logo added over the top. After Thomas Cook collapsed in 2019, several of its former aircraft continued flying in recognizable Thomas Cook paint schemes for months, despite operating for entirely different airlines. So, while Spirit Airlines may be disappearing from the skies, many of its airplanes are not heading for retirement at all. In fact, for most of them, a completely new life is just beginning. So, how far do these planes go? Let's find out. The desert, the boneyards, and the secret second lives of Spirit's planes. So, what happens to the Spirit planes that don't immediately find a new airline willing to take them? The answer takes us far away from busy airports and crowded passenger terminals. It takes us into the deserts of the American Southwest, where rows of silent aircraft sit beneath endless blue skies. If you happen to spot an Airbus A320 with an unusual paint scheme sometime in the next few years, take a closer look. Beneath that fresh coat of paint, there may still be traces of Spirit's famous yellow colors. But while some aircraft will quickly move on to new operators, others are heading somewhere completely different. Welcome to the world of aircraft boneyards. Places like Pinal Air Park in Arizona, Phoenix, Goodyear Airport, Mojave Air and Spaceport in California, and Roswell International Air Center in New Mexico are among the most famous aircraft storage facilities on Earth. At first glance, they look like giant parking lots filled with abandoned airplanes. But there's a reason these facilities exist in the desert. The climate is almost perfect for storing aircraft. Low humidity dramatically slows corrosion. The dry air helps preserve metal components for years. The land is flat, open, and relatively inexpensive. Even local wildlife is less of a problem, reducing the risk of birds, insects, and other animals making homes inside sensitive equipment. For Spirit Airlines, the connection to the desert actually started long before the company collapsed. In one of the strangest twists of the story, dozens of Spirit aircraft were already parked in Arizona before liquidation became reality. Around 77 planes had been grounded because of the industry-wide Pratt & Whitney engine recall. Long before bankruptcy headlines appeared, large portions of the fleet were already sitting idle in the desert sun. In other words, the image of Spirit aircraft lined up in storage wasn't some future prediction, it was already happening. But storing a modern airliner isn't as easy as parking a car and walking away. Every aircraft must go through a detailed preservation process. Fuel tanks are carefully drained and treated. If old fuel is left sitting for too long, bacteria can begin growing inside the tanks. Over time, that contamination can turn fuel residue into a thick substance, often compared to mayonnaise. Technicians also wrap tires in protective mylar coverings to shield them from intense desert heat. Engine openings are sealed to prevent birds and wildlife from getting inside. Sensitive sensors are covered. Windows may be protected. In some cases, aircraft are even coated with reflective materials designed to reduce heat damage from the relentless sun. All of this costs money. In the aviation industry, aircraft are often treated much like organ donors in the medical world. Even when a plane itself is no longer needed, its individual components may still be incredibly valuable. The first items removed are usually the engines. That's because engines are often worth more than many people realize. Modern turbofan engines generate huge revenue through leasing agreements, maintenance programs, and service contracts. In today's market, where engine shortages continue to affect airlines worldwide, These power plants are among the most sought-after assets in aviation. Ironically, the same Pratt & Whitney engine problems that contributed to Spirit's troubles have also increased demand for replacement engines and spare components across the industry. After the engines come off, mechanics begin removing other valuable equipment: landing gear systems, avionics, cockpit displays, navigation equipment, auxiliary power units, pumps, sensors, and countless other components are carefully removed and inspected. Many of these parts will soon be installed on other aircraft operating somewhere else in the world. A component removed from a former Spirit jet could help keep an airline in Europe, Asia, South America, or Africa flying on schedule. Eventually, only the aircraft's aluminum structure remains. At that point, the airframe itself may be dismantled and recycled. The metal can be melted down and reused in entirely different products. Some aviation experts often joke that pieces of retired airplanes eventually return to consumers in the form of everyday aluminum products, including beverage cans. But even that isn't the strangest fate awaiting some of Spirit's aircraft. For a select number of planes, an entirely new career may be waiting. Cargo conversion has become one of the fastest-growing sectors in aviation. Instead of carrying passengers, older airliners can be transformed into dedicated freight aircraft. Once complete, the aircraft can carry more than 21 tons of cargo and spend years transporting packages, medical supplies, electronics, and commercial goods around the globe. Conversion facilities around the world already have long waiting lists, and airlines continue searching for suitable aircraft to transform into freighters. That means some of Spirit's former jets may eventually find themselves carrying cargo instead of vacationers. The next package delivered to your doorstep could arrive aboard an aircraft that once flew holiday travelers to Florida, Las Vegas, or the Caribbean. And that's the part of this story most people never think about. Spirit's fleet isn't really disappearing. It's being redistributed. Some aircraft will join airlines like Frontier or other low-cost carriers. Others may end up serving passengers in Europe, Latin America, Asia, or the Middle East. Some will spend years hauling cargo across continents. Others will remain in storage, providing spare parts that keep hundreds of aircraft flying safely. And some may quietly pass through several more owners before finally reaching retirement decades from now. The logo on the tail may change, the seats may be different, and the passengers may never know the aircraft's history, but the machine itself keeps going. Aviation is built around efficiency, and valuable aircraft are rarely wasted. So when people read headlines about Spirit's collapse, the focus naturally falls on the airline itself, the lost jobs, the canceled flights, and the end of a company that spent decades in the skies. But behind those headlines, another story is unfolding. Ferry pilots quietly repositioned aircraft before dawn, leasing companies signing new agreements, mechanics preserving jets in the desert heat, engineers removing engines worth millions, conversion teams halfway around the world transforming passenger aircraft into freighters. It's a massive, mostly invisible system that never stops moving. One airline disappears, and its aircraft are absorbed into the global aviation network, where they begin serving entirely new purposes. So no, Spirit's 120 airplanes aren't vanishing. For most of them, the end of Spirit is simply the beginning of their next chapter. But how did Spirit Airlines rise before its dramatic collapse? Keep watching to find out. From a small charter company to America's most controversial airline. To understand why the collapse of Spirit Airlines became such a major story, you first have to understand how unlikely its rise was in the first place. Long before the bright yellow airplanes, the ultra-cheap tickets, and the endless debates about baggage fees, the company was something completely different. The story actually begins in 1964 with a business called Clippert Trucking Company. At the time, there was no airline, no fleet of jets, and certainly no plans to become one of the most recognizable low-cost carriers in America. A decade later, in 1974, the company changed its name to Ground Air Transfer, Inc., signaling a shift toward transportation services beyond trucking. The real turning point came in 1983 when entrepreneur Ned Homfeld founded Charter One Airlines in Macomb County, Michigan. Based near Detroit, the company operated as a charter tour business, offering vacation packages to popular destinations such as Atlantic City, Las Vegas, and the Bahamas. Rather than focusing on scheduled airline service, the company specialized in helping travelers reach vacation destinations through organized travel packages. For years, that model worked. Then came a decision that would change everything. In May 1992, the company introduced jet aircraft into its fleet, including McDonnell Douglas DC-9s and MD-80s. Around the same time, it adopted a new name that would eventually become famous throughout the aviation industry: Spirit Airlines. Only weeks later, Spirit entered the scheduled airline business. On June 1, 1992, the airline launched regular service between Detroit and Atlantic City. Additional routes quickly followed, including flights connecting Boston and Providence. Throughout the next several years, Spirit steadily expanded its route network, adding destinations such as Orlando, Fort Lauderdale, St. Petersburg, Fort Myers, Atlantic City, and Philadelphia. At the time, Spirit was still a relatively small carrier trying to establish itself in an industry dominated by much larger airlines. Growth was often challenging, and mistakes could be costly. One of the airline's earliest public controversies arrived during the summer of 1994. An overbooking issue led to the cancellation of tickets for approximately 1,400 customers. According to the company, incorrect instructions given to travel agents caused valid tickets to be mistakenly treated as invalid. The incident generated significant criticism and frustration among travelers. In response, Spirit promised to accommodate affected passengers, even if that meant placing them on competing airlines. While incidents like that created negative headlines, the airline continued growing. Spirit also became a company of several important milestones. In 1996, Janet Patton became Spirit Airlines' first female pilot. 2 years later, she made history again by becoming the airline's first female captain, an achievement that reflected the industry's slow but growing efforts toward greater diversity in aviation leadership roles. As the airline expanded, its corporate identity evolved as well. Spirit originally operated from Metro Detroit, maintaining headquarters in East Point, Michigan. But in 1999, the company relocated its headquarters to Miramar, Florida. The move placed the airline closer to many of its most important routes and positioned it for future growth throughout the southeastern United States and the Caribbean. Yet the biggest transformation in Spirit's history was still ahead. Spirit attracted millions of cost-conscious travelers who cared more about low prices than luxury. Revenue from optional services grew rapidly, helping the airline expand at a remarkable pace. The company also became famous for marketing campaigns that grabbed headlines. Spirit regularly used provocative humor, attention-grabbing advertisements, and promotional fare sales that generated media coverage far beyond the airline industry. Throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, Spirit expanded aggressively across the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. New routes appeared regularly, and the airline continued adding aircraft to support its growing network. However, rapid growth came with trade-offs. To maximize efficiency, Spirit relied heavily on keeping its aircraft flying as much as possible. While that strategy helped control costs, it also left little room for recovery when disruptions occurred. Delays could quickly spread through the network, creating reliability issues that frustrated passengers and damaged the airline's reputation. The company also encountered a variety of regulatory and labor challenges. In 2000, Spirit faced penalties from the Federal Aviation Administration related to aircraft marking and placarding violations. A decade later, in 2010, a pilot strike temporarily shut down operations for more than a week, grounding flights and disrupting travel plans across the network. That same year, Spirit introduced one of the most controversial policies in modern airline history. It became the first major U.S. airline to charge passengers for carry-on baggage. The decision generated outrage at the time. Critics accused the airline of nickel-and-diming customers, while supporters argued that passengers should only pay for the services they actually use. Regardless of public opinion, the policy attracted enormous attention and eventually influenced other low-cost carriers, including Frontier and Allegiant, which adopted similar fee structures. Spirit's reputation faced another challenge in 2012 after public criticism surrounding a non-refundable ticket purchased by a terminally ill military veteran. Following widespread backlash, the airline apologized, refunded the fare, and made a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project. Meanwhile, another threat was emerging. Major airlines had begun studying Spirit's success. Legacy carriers such as Delta, American, and United started introducing basic economy fares that borrowed elements from the ultra-low-cost model. These cheaper fare options allowed traditional airlines to compete more directly with Spirit, while still offering larger route networks, more frequent flights, and stronger reputations for reliability. Suddenly, Spirit was no longer competing only with other budget airlines. It was competing against the industry's biggest players. Recognizing the need for change, Spirit appointed former AirTran executive Robert Fornaro as CEO in 2016. Under his leadership, the airline focused on improving customer service, operational reliability, and overall performance. New training initiatives were introduced, including partnerships with organizations such as the Disney Institute, which specializes in customer experience programs. The efforts produced measurable improvements. By 2017, Spirit's operational performance had improved significantly compared with earlier years. The airline also continued modernizing its fleet and enhancing the passenger experience. In 2018, Spirit began rolling out onboard Wi-Fi, a feature many travelers had long requested. Then, in 2019, another leadership transition occurred when Ted Christie became Chief Executive Officer. At first, the future looked bright. Spirit announced plans for a brand-new headquarters in Dania Beach, Florida. Even more ambitious was the airline's decision to order 100 additional Airbus A320neo family aircraft, one of the largest investments in company history. The order reflected enormous confidence in future growth. Spirit expected to keep expanding, carrying more passengers, opening more routes, and strengthening its position as one of America's leading low-cost airlines. What few people realized at the time was that many of the decisions made during those years, including rapid expansion, heavy aircraft commitments, and dependence on a highly competitive low-cost model, would later play a major role in the dramatic events that eventually brought the airline to its final chapter. And when that chapter finally arrived, it set the stage for the extraordinary fate of the 120 aircraft now scattered across the aviation world. What finally pushed Spirit Airlines to the edge? Stay tuned to find out. The perfect storm that finally brought Spirit down. For years, Spirit Airlines survived challenges that would have seriously damaged many other carriers. Economic downturns, labor disputes, public criticism, rising competition, and even a global pandemic failed to completely knock the airline out of the sky. But eventually, a series of setbacks began stacking on top of each other until the weight became impossible to carry. The beginning of Spirit's final struggle can be traced back to the COVID-19 pandemic. Like every airline in the world, Spirit saw travel demand collapse almost overnight. Airports became empty, flights were canceled, and millions of travelers stayed home. To prevent widespread airline failures, the U.S. government introduced financial assistance through the CARES Act. Spirit received approximately $334 million in grants and loans through the program. The money helped support payroll and keep employees on staff during one of the most difficult periods in aviation history. However, there was an important catch. The amount of assistance airlines received was largely based on their employment levels before the pandemic. Because Spirit had been growing rapidly before COVID struck, the airline did not receive the same level of support as some larger competitors with more established workforces. The funding provided temporary relief, but it wasn't enough to solve the airline's deeper problems. As the industry slowly recovered, Spirit entered a marketplace that looked very different from the one it had known before 2020. Competition became fiercer than ever. Major airlines such as American, Delta, and United aggressively expanded their basic economy offerings. These low-cost tickets allowed traditional carriers to compete directly with Spirit, while still offering passengers larger networks, more flight options, and stronger reputations for reliability. At the same time, airlines across the industry faced a pilot shortage. In 2023, Spirit converted an order for 31 Airbus A319neo aircraft into the larger and more efficient A321neo model. The move reflected changing market conditions and the airline's effort to maximize profitability on future routes. But behind the scenes, financial pressure continued building. By early 2025, Spirit had already begun implementing cost-cutting measures, including workforce reductions. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs as management attempted to preserve cash and stabilize operations. At the same time, another dramatic chapter was unfolding. Several airlines saw Spirit as an attractive acquisition target. The company's valuable route network, airport slots, and fleet made it appealing to competitors looking to expand. In early 2022, Frontier Airlines announced plans to acquire Spirit, in a deal that would have created the fifth-largest airline in the United States. On paper, the merger appeared logical. Both airlines operated under similar low-cost business models and flew comparable fleets of Airbus aircraft. But before that deal could be completed, another suitor entered the picture: JetBlue. In April 2022, JetBlue offered approximately $3.6 billion to purchase Spirit. The proposal immediately sparked debate throughout the aviation industry. Spirit's leadership initially resisted the offer, arguing that regulators would likely oppose the deal. Their concern centered on competition. Regulators could view the acquisition of a major ultra-low-cost carrier by a higher-fare airline as harmful to consumers. Despite those concerns, negotiations continued. Eventually, JetBlue increased its offer and reached an agreement to acquire Spirit. Shareholders approved the deal, and for a moment it appeared that Spirit's future had been secured. Then the government stepped in. The U.S. Department of Justice sued to block the merger, arguing that eliminating Spirit would reduce competition, increase ticket prices, and harm millions of travelers who depended on low-cost airfare. The legal battle stretched into late 2023. Then came the decision that many aviation analysts now view as the turning point in Spirit's collapse. In January 2024, a federal judge blocked JetBlue's acquisition of Spirit. The ruling sent shockwaves through Wall Street and the airline industry. Spirit's stock price immediately plunged by nearly half. Investors panicked. Analysts began openly questioning whether the airline could survive on its own. For the first time, bankruptcy discussions moved from speculation to a realistic possibility. Spirit publicly denied plans to seek bankruptcy protection and insisted it was exploring alternatives. However, the failed merger left the company with fewer options, shrinking cash reserves, and growing uncertainty about its future. A few months later, JetBlue officially abandoned the acquisition attempt. By November 2024, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. The airline announced plans to seek Chapter 11, bankruptcy protection. Investors reacted instantly, sending the company's stock into a steep decline. Shortly afterward, Spirit formally filed for bankruptcy, citing mounting losses, growing debt obligations, intense competition, and the collapse of merger opportunities. Although bankruptcy allowed the airline to continue operating, it was a clear sign of how serious the crisis had become. The company emerged from bankruptcy during the spring of 2025 after restructuring portions of its debt and receiving court approval for its reorganization plan. For a brief moment, there appeared to be hope. A new leadership team was installed. Dave Davis became Chief Executive Officer. Management promoted plans for recovery and promised a stronger future. But the optimism didn't last. Only months later, Spirit warned that cash reserves were once again running dangerously low. Despite restructuring efforts, the airline continued losing money. In August 2025, less than a year after its first filing, Spirit entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection for a second time. That second filing alarmed many industry observers. Airlines occasionally survive one bankruptcy. Very few survive repeated financial collapses in such a short period. To conserve cash, Spirit launched an aggressive restructuring program. The airline reduced flying capacity, shrank its route network, and announced widespread furloughs. Roughly one-third of the company's flight attendants faced temporary layoffs. Hundreds of pilots were also affected through furloughs or downgrades. Thousands of employees suddenly found themselves wondering whether the airline they had built careers around would survive. Management called the effort a shrink-to-shine strategy. The goal was simple: become smaller, leaner, and eventually profitable again. But another crisis was already approaching. By early 2026, fuel prices began rising sharply due to escalating geopolitical tensions and instability in global oil markets. For airlines, fuel is often one of the largest operating expenses. Even modest increases can have major consequences. Spirit's business model depended on keeping costs extremely low. When fuel prices surged, the airline had very little room to absorb the impact. The situation quickly became critical. Years of losses, heavy debt, failed merger attempts, labor cost increases, fleet challenges, and repeated bankruptcies had already weakened the company. The spike in fuel prices simply pushed Spirit closer to the edge. By April 2026, reports indicated that liquidation had become a real possibility. The airline desperately searched for solutions. Executives sought government assistance. Industry observers watched closely as negotiations unfolded behind closed doors. For a brief moment, there was still hope that Spirit might survive. Then, those efforts collapsed. On May 2, 2026, shortly after midnight, Spirit Airlines operated its final flight. After decades in business, the airline officially ceased operations. The last aircraft completed its journey into Dallas-Fort Worth, bringing an end to a company that had spent more than 40 years carrying millions of passengers across North America and the Caribbean. The shutdown triggered immediate consequences. Passengers scrambled to find alternative transportation. Airlines introduced special rescue fares to help stranded travelers reach their destinations. Several carriers also extended assistance to former Spirit employees, offering hiring opportunities and expedited recruitment programs. Meanwhile, legal disputes began emerging. Some former employees argued that proper notice requirements had not been followed and explored potential legal action regarding the layoffs. But while passengers were booking new flights and employees were searching for new jobs, another operation was already underway. Across airports throughout the country, former Spirit pilots received a very different assignment. Instead of carrying passengers, they were flying empty aircraft. One by one, Spirit's jets began departing for long-term storage facilities and aircraft boneyards. Guided by specialized aviation companies, the airplanes that had once represented one of America's largest low-cost carriers were quietly repositioned for whatever came next. And that brings us back to the question at the heart of this story. Once the airline was gone, what would happen to the aircraft that remained? As it turns out, the death of Spirit Airlines was only the beginning of an entirely new journey for its fleet. What do you think about how Spirit's 120 abandoned airplanes will be redistributed and used? Let us know in the comments section below. In the end, Spirit Airlines may be gone, but its 120 airplanes are far from finished. Some will fly for new airlines, some will carry cargo, and others will help keep aircraft around the world in the air. While the company disappeared, its fleet is beginning a whole new journey. If you enjoyed learning the shocking truth about what happens to Spirit's 120 abandoned airplanes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more amazing aviation stories.